I'm so glad to have today on my show Daniel Runde, Senior Vice President, Center for Strategic and International Studies. How are you today, Daniel?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Maria.
What is the main argument in your book, The American Imperative?
Yeah, I wrote The American Imperative, Reclaiming Global Leadership Through Soft Power, to make the argument that the United States needed to rethink its non-military power because it's an important form of our power. And in this new age of great power competition with China and Russia, China and Russia have the ability to fill voids. They can fill vaccine voids, infrastructure voids, technology voids, values voids. So if we do nothing, China now has the ability to fill those voids. And so my argument was that we needed to look at the world. If we believe there's a period of great power competition that I think that we're in, including of China and Russia, a lot of our competition is not going to be in Beijing and Moscow. A lot of our competition are going to be in places like Guatemala City, Cairo, places like Kyiv and the Pacific Islands and Indonesia, among other places.
But both Russia and China are increasing their influence in the Middle East. What should the United States do about it to counter their approach?
I think my argument is we need to speak to the most important hopes and aspirations of people. Sometimes that's about fighting corruption. Sometimes that's about supporting jobs. Sometimes that's about supporting science. Sometimes that's about supporting the role of women. So things like that.
You worked for the United States Agency for International Development. How can the USaid enhance the soft power of American foreign policy?
So USaid is an important arm of American soft power. It's not the only arm of American soft power, but it's a very important one. USaid in places like the Middle East invests in things like basic education. Sometimes it's about supporting higher education at universities in the Middle East. Sometimes it's about supporting science and technology and innovation, something that's in many countries is really important, including especially middle-income countries, countries like Morocco or countries like Egypt. In places like Egypt and Turkey, USaid were major supporters of creating the tourism sector in both of those countries by supporting hospitality training and others. So the infrastructure of tourism that took decades to build, but some of that is a result of the efforts of USAID.
We go back to China. You wrote an article in The Hill. You said President Biden should raise development country debt with C. What do you suggest in this matter?
Yeah, so I think the issue is that today, much of the debt that is held in developing country debt isn't held by banks like Citibank or JP Morgan. A lot of the debt in developing countries now is held by, some of it's held by hedge funds and some of it's held by China. So the issue's been lots of other stakeholders have been willing to say, well, we probably need to, we've got there because of COVID and because of rising interest rates and because of an economic slowdown, perhaps we need to renegotiate the debt. Well, mainland China has been unwilling to do so for a number of reasons. Many of them have to do with domestic reasons, because if China writes down some of its international debt, it also has a lot of domestic debt. And a lot of domestic debt holders in China will say, wait a minute, why are you writing off the debt, the Chinese debt overseas? If you can write it off overseas, you can write it off here. So they've been unwilling to engage on writing off debt, largely for, in essence, domestic reasons.
In another appearance on Fox News, you warned against playing political games in reference to the career of David Malpass, the current president of the World Bank. What do you mean, and what's going on there?
So there were attempts, there were voices that were saying, well, we really ought to fire David Malpass because he answered some questions about climate change in a way that wasn't satisfactory to a number of interest groups, mainly advocacy groups who worry about the environment and climate change. And so there were threats to try and remove. He has a contract through April of 2024. This was about less than 6 months ago. And the point I made was, if we're going to change the rules have been Well, we're going to respect the contracts of people like David Malpass, and we're going to respect, they're going to be able to serve through the end of their contract, which is April 2024. So if they were to pull David Malpass early, it would create a precedent that if there was a Republican president in the near future, and there was a World Bank president that replaced David Malpass, probably a Democrat, we would be able to apply the same sort of unfair and unpleasant rules to them. And so I think the article helped quiet the conversation, because there were people who were, I didn't hear anybody talk about it anymore after that, because I just pointed out, like, if you want to play that game can go two ways, and it won't be fun if the shoe's on the other foot.
The UAE was chosen to held the COP28 in 2023. How do you see the performance of the UAE in climate change?
Well, I think we're still going to need, I think oil and gas are still going to be needed for a really long time. And if there's going to be a carbon transition, we're going to still need a lot of gas. So I would first start with that. Second, I think that we need to invest in energy innovation, both energy efficiency with our existing forms of energy, but also innovation in terms of new forms of energy. And that ultimately our environmental and climate concerns need to ultimately be solved by technology. In the meantime, we also have to realize that, unfortunately, if we're going to have a carbon transition, there's going to require a lot of mining. There's going to be a lot of mining. And so we're going to have to make some hard trade-offs. So in the meantime, we need a lot of gas. We're still going to need probably a lot of oil. But if we're going to move in that direction, we're going to have to think long and hard. The COP process needs to incorporate significantly the fact that we're going to have to do a lot of mining in a lot of places, and we're going to have to get involved with it very quickly.
Talking about Iran and the influence in Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, how do you see the United States soft power can help these countries to be free from this influence?
So I think we need to do a better job. We need to revisit our strategic communications. I think that we should be looking to engage Iranian young people. If we could have some sort of a peaceful turnover in government in Iran, that'd be one of the best things that would happen for the world. We ought to be aiming to try and do that. In the meantime, we should be trying to support good people and support women and girls education, and support basic education in places like Lebanon, and support, and support human rights in places like that as well.
How do you see the progress in Saudi Arabia, the reforms, Vision 2030, all the transactions that is going on right now?
Well, I think it's very impressive. One has to recognize that there are some really important changes happening in Saudi Arabia. I think it's something that deserves a lot of attention and a lot of merit. I think there are concerns still here in the United States about some issues in Saudi Arabia. At the same time, I think given how the world has changed in the last 12 months, Saudi Arabia is a partner of the United States. The Gulf states are partners of the United States. And ultimately, they are important partners that we need to work with, whether it's on security issues or energy issues or development issues. They're partners that we need to work with. But friends can also have disagreements, and friends should be able to speak to each other frankly about things we disagree with.
How do you look at the war in Ukraine? Is there any certain model of program to end this crisis that affect the whole world?
So it's very distressing what's happening in Ukraine. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine should worry all of us. And many countries did not vote the right way, including some in the Middle East, who kind of sat on the fence on the UN and the UN votes. And I think it's very disappointing and very unfortunate, because if Russia were to somehow be seen as succeeding at some kind of an acceptable price, and I think they've paid a really heavy price so far, and I hope they pay a more heavy price, it would create the invitation for other states to decide to adjust their borders or do things that, invade other countries willy-nilly. And it's going to give people a green light to do that. So the world is watching. We need to demonstrate that Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine is a very bad precedent and that other people shouldn't replicate it. So part of it is we need to help ensure that Ukraine wins the war against Russia and that Russia decides that they never want to do this ever again because this was a very bad idea. But also we want other countries, including countries in the Middle East and countries like China, to see what happened in Ukraine and what happened to Russia and Ukraine, say, I don't want to happen to me what happened to Russia in Ukraine, meaning that I lost more than 100,000 people, became an international pariah, had my economy shrank, had my society cut off from the rest of the world, my inability to travel, my inability to get critical components for my economy. All of that, we need to continue to put pressure on Ukraine. We should on Russia. We should give Russia all the weapons it needs to prosecute this war, to defeat Russia. Mm-hmm. At the same time, what we should be doing is we're running at my day job, we're running a big commission on Ukraine reconstruction. Mm-hmm. We've conducted 20 seminars since June 1. We've convened a very high-level commission, and our conclusion is that the most important thing for Ukraine is for Ukraine to join the European Union. This is not a military agreement. This is an economic and political and diplomatic arrangement. It's really important, and the vast majority of Ukrainians want to join the European Union. So the most important thing we can do is to bring that about. What we want is for Ukraine to be as rich as Poland, as strong as Israel, fully embedded in the European Union.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, really, thank you so much for sharing your opinion with us on the Capital Show.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Hey, Maria Maloof here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Maloof TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.